It's such a pleasure to be here in Swansea talking to you about your poetry. You edited Poetry Wales from 2014 to 2019, and I wonder if you'd care to share some of your editorial highlights from that period, please.
Yeah, of course, Diolch am y sgwrs. Um, yeah, dwi'n mor hapus i siarad ar Poetry Wales. I had a number of really exciting waves of poetry and poetics that I edited. I was reading constantly all these poems from around the world. We had lots of poets in translation from different parts. We had, uh, you know, poetry in English from around the world as well. I had a number of themed issues that were really interesting. So one was on violence, another one on desire, and had lots of really like sexy poems in it and pieces. We had a an issue later on about ritual, which is what I was fascinated at by the time, and it was just like remarkable reading all this stuff by different kinds of poem. I had a really like eclectic taste, so I had all kinds of different poetry in there, experimental, lyrical, weird and wonderful things, all kind of juxtaposed in the pages. And it was quite an interesting time as well because it was quite politically fraught and new media was changing things. So the poets and I were all engaging with the changes that were happening and thinking about the world and thinking about things like climate change and political kind of changes. And that thinking through what was happening in the world through poetry was like, yeah, it was a real privilege to kind of to see that happening and to read all these different poets. I was very busy.
Obviously, your own poetry is very much concerned with bodily desires, how the body interacts in a ritualistic way, and I wonder if your own poetry was influenced through the process of editorships. If you took on perhaps themes and motifs, and maybe if you if your own subsequent writing, I wonder if it has been influenced by that period.
Yeah, so at the time I was studying, I was researching into ritual, which then kind of turns into some more of an interest in performance generally and embodied practice. So how you can use things like ritual and the body's kind of techniques of the body to compose and to share and perform poetry. I was really interested in the change or the transformation that takes place when you share or enact poetry. So that was at the same time as editing Poetry Wales. So it's actually really difficult to trace that what was influenced because I was reading so much and I was kind of looking in many different directions at once, looking at all around the world. I think that it probably is quite a practical influence that just basically publishing 3 times a year gives you this like impetus to get things out there and to share things and to work with people and to get things done as well. So I think it was actually one of the biggest influences was working with so many people in the act of producing poetry on the page in a magazine form. I think that put me out in the world in a completely new way. So I think that definitely influenced my work. And then also I would pick up on things that people were interested in as well. So I think we did some stuff on disability. The stuff about the kind of no future stuff, about kind of thinking about the future. These are all things that were kind of interests that kind of came through Poetry Wales and some of the poets that I worked with on that. And visual poetry as well. I'm just trying to think what else. It was like it's such a enriching time that and so kind of like rapidly kind of evolving that it's quite hard to trace how things went really. But I I sometimes look back and see things in there that I'm like, oh, that's really good. Like there was an issue about, we did a translation workshop with Welsh and Latvian poets working together with Literature Across Frontiers, who I worked with quite a lot as well. And that was so interesting to work in translation of different languages as well. So that was also a big influence for me at the time. Great. So I'm reading some poems from my new collection, Votive Mess. It came out, published by Blood Axe in October 2024. To the east. To the east, walk across that path you can see. The meadow is an apex of what was perfect. In the trees beyond, you find someone's shelter. This is the intended walk. It finds its sights by itself. Pollinators visit the spot where yesterday two of you. A polity here, the string between the nowness. It wasn't a smart move to swing so freshly towards this. Admire his sunburn turned to red rud. This is the colour of demigods, but it rocks away from summer like objectivity. To the east I saw my own path.
How did poetry begin for you?
When I was really young, I think, most obviously, I started writing poetry when I was a teenager. My teacher gave me a book of Gerard Manley Hopkins as a kind of way to, I think up until then everyone had said, oh, that's wonderful, Nia, you've done a really good job. But he was like, oh no, you could work on this and you could improve it. Read these poets, read Gerard Manley Hopkins, which is, but it's still kind of really important influence actually. So that was very important to actually be kind of like given the permission to see poetry as something you can actually work on and be immersed in the process of, and not to just sort of put it out there and leave it. So that was the one beginning, but you could go further back and maybe think about, I suppose my earliest relationship with language might have also played a part. Like I was born in Sheffield and grew up in Sheffield. My mother's from a Welsh-speaking family, so there was quite a bit of Cymraeg, but I didn't really learn it enough. But there was also a sense of other languages in the house, and I was quite into. I must have been quite into the sound of languages, rhymes and songs and things like that. So yeah, I think being immersed and being quite enjoying playing with language was obviously there at the beginning. Yeah. Blood right. Blood's metamorphosis, feathers in shreds. Or so the story goes, and out into the night flies. I, in the dark, hands of feathers 5. Foretaste tasted like petals. A lover falls into the join in my lover plus green rush, your bounteous watch, ancestress woven from ditch. Chrysalis, pairs of eyes in the wood, be in my spine and over my face. Flutter morph, sinflush, flutes for crone. The untold part flitters, a crown of meadowsweet, a bracelet of derwin, anklet of birch, and the catkins are in here too. Orpheus was pets at home, Pentheus was gruel, Euripides farts long and guttural. Careful, nothing is foreclosed yet. Says a chalice, says amber, says I am the implement, says spine out of pine, says rose, says scream fetch or fetish, says the pail of water, says lech, says grandiose, says homeward, says algae, says grape perk rock. So we can set to work in a beauteous rage and can rebirth in ash flower, can fall into lip balm and shrine like. Lover nuanced on me, flush with her cardio. She was willing to be secret unsaid. Dip thrice and pimpwise. mammy, mermy, mermy, mare, crane, cross, immerse, emerge, emer, mer. Effectual, sandal-less, soft oak. It was good to meet her, he said. Parakeet aloft, my green visitor, or any everyday beauty. There's an isle off the shining foreshore, and the moon of Porthcawl. I never know vanilla, no. Lilliking whispered, true nocturnal off balance. Each limb wrote you, I was made for loving you. But I loved another in the wood, so you mettered me, babe, meadwort and bolognese denial. A ring of precious rave gods, Jarvis, Fritjof, Julian and Lisa. Now I need an ash tree aureole or Kenai circle. Ken, the perfect medium for Jack. Alice, the perfect medium for Alan. Ken, the rib on the oak. A patina, half algae, half moss. Ken in the medium of Hardowich. Ken, saint of lichen and of hedge. Saint of the patch of ditch. So I am reborn in the lichenate. And my floristry is flying to you by night, foretelling death but whose. May it be the best and hoped for, etc. Green freedom, etc. Alterwise by owl bite. Forest library, safflax, brow, meadow height.
Your 2017 debut poetry collection, All Fours, published by Blood Axe, hints at the difference between what is uttered and what is meant. I'd love to know more about this collection.
This is my first collection of poetry, and there's all kinds of different, so definitely a collection of different types of poems, like miscellany. Yeah, the difference between what is uttered and what is meant. I was very interested in translation at that time, and kind of mistranslation or miscommunication, and kind of, I guess, what obscurity is, and because I was very interested in the sound of language, the materiality of language, and the kind of slippery, multiple kind of possibilities of language. And then there was always this question of like, well, what meaning is, or what are you communicating something? So I was quite interested in that, in how language can be used when it's not communicative, or it is communicative, but it's communicative in a different kind of in a different way, that's like working under the surface of things. So yeah, and there's also there's a series of poems in there called The Long Words, which were the titles were taken from the English translation of very long words in different languages that have long words. So it was started with this long word in Turkish, which I can't quite say anymore, but I used to say it, which is aren't you one of those they tried to make to be originating from Czechoslovakia? And so I found that very interesting, and there's several languages where this happens, and that was the titles. Then there was one called, I think it was from Lithuanian, which was those who could not pick enough of the small wood sorrel early in the year. So things like that. So I was very interested in those kind of differences in translation. And then there was also a couple of poems in there from kind of folk tales and fairy tales and mythology, which probably comes from my grandmother, because she was a storyteller. So I was very interested in that as well. And then, yeah, probably a lot of messing around, cheap gags, things like that, having fun with language. I think it's a much denser kind of set of poems than the ones I've just published, which feels a lot more freewheeling. It's much more intricate and kind of into the tiny little sounds and intricate syntax. in all fours. But yeah, and then the title as well, which is like kind of very interested in how that can be read in a number of ways, all fours. In different languages, though, it's dirtier and less dirtier. But in English, it can be kind of a couple of different things. So yeah.
Your most recent collection, Votive Mess, also published by Blood Axe this autumn. This is a stunning collection of poems that stretches language in so many different ways. I'd love to know what interests you in using language so playfully.
Yeah, play is really important to me. The sort of open-ended, improvisational kind of moment of freedom, really, that you get in composition and in embodied practice and movement. Quite interested in with this collection, a lot more interested in things like movement and performance and what happens when you speak language, and how you use the space and the body and all the elements that kind of are entangled with the language making. Yeah, so play is really important, and also it's double, triple sense of play as well, because you can have like this kind of liminal space of play where you can go in sort of like an as if. There's lots of I was quite interested in influenced by kind of experimental theatre practices as well. So there's a sort of as if of performance, but then yeah, play can also take you to kind of you can put the mind or language into kind of more trickier, darker, critical questions as well. So there's serious play. What did you ask that I? Yeah, testing language in lots of different ways. Yeah, and I suppose I like to play games of language and to yeah, there's lots of collage and cut up and on the one hand there's lots of collage and cut up and things borrowed from different places. Very interested in those kind of like layerings of different found languages. But then there was also the development, which I'm only just really realising now after I published the book, of slightly longer, sort of more kind of like epic kind of things kind of emerging in that collection. So on the one hand, Votive Mess is all about the kind of mess of performance and the kind of potential, because a votive thing is like this kind of offering of something. Kind of when you perform, you're sort of like sharing something with people. But then, yeah, that was a mess most of the time. Like I'm interested in like shabby theatre or the poetry reading as something that is like could go really well or it could go badly wrong. What happens to our body when we speak, like when we're reading the poetry? What happens to my mouth when I'm reading? How do people listen? How do people kind of join in and hear the work? So I was interested in that, but then yeah, I've noticed that there's this more kind of epic, freewheeling poems in there that probably just riff on or take, travel with the idea and an object, take it into a new place. And I think there's quite a lot of dreams I've realised as well, in the way that a dream can kind of unspool through this kind of like wandering environment. Another thing that was influencing on it was definitely psychoanalysis as well. So that kind of like delving basically and rolling with an idea, a metaphor, a thought through language is what's really interesting. And I keep thinking of more things to say, but you're one more thing was I also was learning Cymraeg, Welsh, in this time period. So there's quite a lot of Welsh in it as well, and me trying to figure out how to kind of read and starting to kind of use that language a bit more. And I think some of the epic stuff in there comes from thinking about figures like Taliesin and some of the stories that inform my work. So yeah.
There is a fascination, kind of, in your sense, about, I guess, stretching language, but also championing experimentation within language. And I think, this is quite, this is quite rare. I think we don't tend to see enough of this, wanting to champion, going beyond the page, going beyond the norm. Really, I wonder if if you might want to say something. Where do you get, uh, what makes you want to stretch language, and also encourage, others who are stretching language.
Yeah. Well, I think language is in itself has this um, always this potential to go in multiple directions and um, to sort of, there's this like poesis, like this change that's possible in language. There's like a kind of and how you interact with other senses and mediums. So how you use the visual or the audio, our ears or touch and so I think part of my interest is that I want to see the underbelly of words and to kind of push out into some other form of meaning that's beyond the kind of beyond the surface of things, and to show the kind of like trickiness of language. But yeah, I'm also very interested in other art forms. So performance has been the one that I've been really interested in. But how we use all the senses in language. So visual and sound and embodiment. That's always in the production. And when you speak, when you use language, it's coming from every bit of your body and every bit of your history and every bit of how you relate to other people. So yeah, I'm really interested in those kind of like crossing of wires and networks of tangled lines that that language can do, and that's what sort of poetry is really good for. It's for like it's really capacious in what it can be. Any kind of art of language, any kind of like possibility of change through language and its interaction with meaning, and the materiality of language. So I think that's why I do. I do still. I'm not always. I haven't like abandoned my original interest in a poem that might be more kind of following some of the sort of more traditional tracks that poetry can take. I'm still really interested in the very subtle things that can happen in a poem as well. It's not necessarily so dramatic or daring. Yeah, there's all sorts to discover in a poem, I think. Fairy business. Just a lightweight pine cone. Rest, get some rest now. Little teeth, but sharp. They eat the shapelets and the poems. In the night, these fairies jumbled up my sock drawers, and now a light shines through the holiest ones. A cheap joke from my fairy lord who came in on cam 4 to ask for the socks with holes in specifically. I think nothing of this fetish. Myself often thought of fairy conditions where everything milk and lip becomes sensation, palpating undergarment drawers, golden thimbles of ale. It's a personal thing, or cash, get the bill, or actually they dealt in tiny loaves, or actually they came round rarely via the back lane gully, but exceptions to the rule make the rule. I sometimes find my lover's laughter creepy, so I speak to my fairy lord who never irks. But conditions in the forest became too alkaline. Lichen falters. Mulch is heavily muffled. A dairy farm across the way keeps the strip lights on all night, pump the milk and light. The pine cone's magical properties are something to do with the gland above the penis or the pineal or the pituitary gland. It doesn't matter. It's just all third eye pressing through. But nowadays I need specificity. I already lost one friend to Gaia.com, and I need some new vocabulary to get her back. So I take a map of the local bomb craters, a walk that will collapse me, wake me, make a walk that will sink me into bramble pits, into history, into future. But I need quality over-trousers for the rolling, for the suckering tripwires. The brambles pull you back, pull me back to the wood, and the mosses over every horizon. My fairy lord laughed once. That was enough. I might have told a good joke once. That was enough. At least for the poem to be squeezed out. A small cup of fairy ale or airy ale from blackberries. Think what that would taste of. Yes, fairy conditions are the conditions of passage, the not yet. Conditions of the gully and the thin. TT does not stand for twee tat. Sometimes their conditions went on in the back palaces of egos, and when I came back, everything was upside down. I didn't want to blame my poor friend, so I made a porridge out of pine nuts. The butter rose to the top, and it was rich enough. I am not a prince presenting himself to the fairy motorcade, bartering for pine nuts, charcoal nodes. I am just here in the gully waiting for their havoc.
Who are the poets and writers to have inspired your own writing journey?
Yeah, so I mentioned Gerard Manley Hopkins earlier, and some of those early kind of immersions in people like Dylan Thomas and I think like Sylvia Plath, and it's when I was very young. And then later I studied in London with Roddy Lumsden, who was a mentor to lots of poets, and so I was very then kind of immersed in kind of contemporary poetry, the scene in London and like in that time. And then later got interested in translation, so was interested in poets from around the world. Poets like Celan. Was very interested in the stuff that Jerome Rothenberg collected in various anthologies, assemblages. And then I got into kind of performance and experimentation. I was really interested in people like Maggie O'Sullivan, Geraldine Monk, Bob Cobbing, and then a couple of kind of North Americans, Canadians like Lisa Robertson, and many others. I go through phases, waves of things. I think Kim Hai-soon. There's probably Banu Kapil. This is when we start kind of like drifting around the cosmos of work. At the moment I'm reading some recent stuff. I'm reading Jay Gao.
Yeah.
I really like that, and I'm reading Renee Gladman, who's more kind of poetics and prose, and I suppose the waves have been things like early interest in poetry, and then Gerard Manley Hopkins, and then the London kind of pink things that were happening in London in the early like 2010s, and then experimenters like from America and Britain, and then also most recently very interested in kind of intermedia and performance, and how people who kind of work between between mediums like Carol A. Schneemann and Jerome Rothenberg. It's fantastic influence on so many people, both for his poetry and also his kind of bringing together, gathering of a paradise of poets, he calls it. So.
Are you working on anything at present?
I'm working on. It's interesting because it's like the light is falling and it's dusk. I've been working on quite a lot of things that are to do with night and day and dusk and transitions between those things. I went to an amazing play by Volcano Theatre last year called Confessions of a Dark Room. So I've been thinking a lot about the night and the dark. Also very influenced there by Simon Whitehead, who's an artist in West Wales who works a lot in these kind of dusk times as well with movement and ecology. So I'm interested in that, and I'm also really interested in interdisciplinarity or intermedia, or what happens in between mediums and between things. So you know, what can poetry and poetics, how can that help us think, and how can that help us kind of think about what the human is in the kind of middle of like contemporary disasters or dilemmas. So what is the human language? What can poetry sort of give us philosophically, basically, to think about things like what the human is in relation to machines and media like AI, or in terms of ecology and climate change. How can we how does the way we work with language kind of give us some kind of, or multiple ways of thinking through some of these huge problems that we're facing. So that's quite general, and maybe in a more specific way, I'm also currently writing something about a friend of mine, Amy Macaulay, who's also been a big influence on me, and she did a performance at a poetry festival that we organised in 2018-19 called Poetry Emergency in Manchester. I co-created with some other poets in Manchester. So Amy did this performance there where she kind of turned upside down and completely turns it inside out, the idea of a poetry reading. And even though it was a number of years ago, we're still reeling from it. So I'm trying to work out what happened. It was very like dramatic and violent and deconstructed poetry reading. So yeah, I'm kind of writing something at the moment that's kind of thinking about what happened in that moment, and what happens when, because I'm very interested in performance and ritual and things like that, because it seemed to be a lens into the moment of when the individual person, human, is in interaction with a community, and what is it to be in dialogue with each other, and what is it to exist together. And one of the things that I found interesting about Amy's performance was that it was kind of like an antagonistic, it's not just this smooth delivery of meaning, but quite a lot of the poetry that I don't really like that much, which is just expecting this straight up, smooth presentation of something that you will immediately get meaning from. I'm much more interested in the friction and the kind of weirdnesses and the uncanny happenings on stage. Like once in Volcano Theatre, another performance, there was a guide dog there, and the guide dog came and peed on the stage. So you're interested in things like that happening, like weird things like that. And so yeah, like there's something about this kind of like agon, or this like antagonistic anti-theatre or shabby theatre of poetry reading that of the poetry reading that I'm interested in at the moment. Yeah, and what happens when we speak to each other, and how what are we talking about? So I'm interested in the vernacular as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Diolch yn fawr. Nia.
Diolch.
It's been such a pleasure talking
Yeah.
to you and finding out about your poetry.
Oh, diolch am y sgwrs.